Now, if you're sitting on a modern corporate board, your main directive is usually pretty clear, right? Maximize long-term shareholder value. But today, we're unpacking a historical text that completely challenges the very foundation of how we actually define that value. We're looking at what the source calls the moral architecture of Islamic economics. And look, this isn't just some historical curiosity. The text frames this as a serious strategic blueprint, a way for modern business leaders to audit their own traditional profit models. Let's just dive right into the analysis. So, how do we distribute wealth fairly? It's the big one. This is literally the single universal tension at the heart of every economic system, and honestly, every corporate earnings call. Who gets what and why? From ancient communities bartering goods all the way up to today's massive multinational conglomerates, the core challenge is always about resource allocation. And the source material we're breaking down today builds its entire analysis around this exact point: how different systems try to answer this fundamental question of distribution. To set the stage, the source categorizes the two dominant economic frameworks of the last century by looking at one simple question: who decides? On one hand, you have capitalism. Capitalism says, hey, let the market decide, promising absolute freedom. But according to the text, the reality often turns into systemic exploitation. On the flip side, socialism says, let the state decide, promising total equality. The reality there, though, it ends up crushing human initiative under heavy state compliance. The text's main premise here is that both of these frameworks, despite their really grand promises, have ultimately failed to sustainably balance profit with actual human thriving. Breaking those flaws down a bit further, the text points out that capitalism basically delivers exploitation dressed up as opportunity. It rewards entrenched power while completely ignoring the vulnerable. It's essentially a traditional profit model built on short-term extraction. Socialism, on the other hand, puts so much power in the hands of the state that it suffocates the entrepreneurial drive that any healthy society actually needs to survive. So the text presents this as a massive lose-lose scenario. You're either sacrificing equality for the illusion of total freedom, or you're sacrificing that human drive for a forced, mandated equality. Well, how does this alternative framework handle that dilemma? The text introduces this incredibly powerful pivot. It says, Islam looked at both and said, you are each carrying half a truth. I just love how that's framed. It doesn't want to just burn down the ideas of the free market or the state entirely. Instead, it proposes a social responsibility-based structure, one that merges the undeniable human need for free enterprising with the absolute necessity of social equality. It's presented as this highly strategic middle ground. Okay, so if it's not strictly the invisible hand of the market and it's not a massive state bureaucracy, who actually decides how wealth gets distributed? The text outlines three core pillars: conscience, community, and creator. You can think of this like the ultimate corporate governance framework. Your conscience guides your personal ethics, your community acts like your stakeholders holding you accountable, and the creator provides the absolute moral baseline. The whole decision-making process is completely embedded within this moral architecture. And right here is the absolute core of this third way. The source is very clear. Private ownership is a protected right. You can absolutely build businesses, accumulate capital, buy property, all of that. But it's not absolute. The text asserts that wealth has a social responsibility built directly into its very existence. If we took that and applied it to a modern boardroom, you'd basically need a total audit of your current company assets, and not just for their financial yield, but for their social impact potential. Because in this system, simply holding wealth means you literally owe a debt to the society that helped you generate it. Now, this responsibility is enforced through what the text calls Zakat. And it's really important to note, the source frames this not just as a religious concept, but as a highly sophisticated economic mechanism. It's a mandatory, precisely calculated redistribution of wealth that is built directly into the financial engine. By mandating that a percentage of stagnant wealth flows back into the community, it ensures local economic resilience, it boosts purchasing power for the vulnerable, and, crucially for business, it creates the exact kind of long-term community stability that companies actually need to thrive. This brilliantly highlights the difference between corporate PR and actual systemic equity. Charity is optional generosity. It's given when a company has a great quarter and maybe wants some positive press. But zakat, as the text emphasizes, is mandatory justice. When that accumulated wealth flows back to the community, it is absolutely not considered welfare. It's actually the community claiming its rightful dividend from the wealth that was generated right there within it. Equally important to what the system mandates is what it completely prohibits. The text defines riba, or interest, as money lending money. It's wealth growing without effort, without risk, and without making any actual contribution to real production. Let's use a simple analogy based on the text. If a justice-based system is like planting an orchard, where the farmer and the community both share the fruit and the risk, an interest-based system is more like a parasite. It's extracting nutrients without adding any value whatsoever to the host. And the text points a very critical finger at modern capitalism for running almost its entire engine on this extraction mechanic. So why is interest so strictly banned in this framework? Well, the source argues that interest structurally guarantees that the wealth gap will just keep growing. Think about it. If wealth compounds indefinitely without any labor or risk, the people with capital are just going to accelerate away from the people selling their labor. For directors who are truly concerned with long-term value, the text presents a really stark warning here. This mechanic mathematically guarantees systemic inequality. And over time, that inequality erodes the very consumer base and societal stability that businesses rely on to even exist. When we pull back and look at the complete synthesis model, it's doing four key things. First, it protects private ownership, which incentivizes innovation. That's the half-truth of capitalism. But second, it completely bans idle wealth. And third, prevents exploitation. Crucially, it doesn't just default to state ownership like socialism does. Instead, and this is the fourth point, it structurally mandates remembering the struggling through these built-in mechanisms. It's essentially a blueprint for integrating deep, structural social responsibility directly into a core business model. Ultimately, the text is arguing for a massive paradigm shift. For a century, the world has built its economies around one main question: how do we grow wealth purely in volume? But this alternative model builds around a much deeper, more strategic question: how do we grow wealth in a way that prioritizes and dignifies every single human being involved? The text notes that when financial decision-making actually centers on human dignity rather than just sheer volume, you fundamentally change the resulting society. It's a total game changer. You know what is perhaps most provocative about this source material? Its track record. As we watch modern capitalism visibly fracture under the weight of inequality and state-run socialism repeatedly fail its promises, the text reminds us that this alternative framework isn't some untested, pie-in-the-sky startup theory. It has literally been stress-tested for 14 centuries. As the author boldly states, the system actually works. We just stopped teaching it. Which leads us to the final question. Is the world ready for an economic system built entirely on moral responsibility? It's a massive challenge, no doubt about it. When you strip away the labels and look strictly at the mechanics, banning risk-free compounding, mandating precise wealth redistribution, and tying private property directly to social liability, it challenges every director, every executive, and really every individual to completely reimagine our interaction with capital. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this framework gives you a powerful new lens for evaluating how we generate and share value.